Okay, I'll call up our panel, which will be moderated by Space Northwest Director of Entrepreneurship, Sean McClinton, and include Stan and representatives from Portal and RBC Signals.
All right, how's everybody doing this morning? Good, thank you all for being here today. I'm Sean McClinton, Director of Entrepreneurship and co-founder. Quick question. How many here in the room from industry? Please raise your hands. How many economic development? Okay, so we have a good mix in the room. I've been working on growing the space industry for 10 years now. It's a weird hobby or passion, wherever Stan, there we are. That I think we all share here, and I guess that some of you share that as well. And I think Stan always does an excellent job of kind of framing what the potential of the area is here. So here to moderate this panel with this group of distinguished panelists on the two topic areas for the conference, the Outernet and advanced power and propulsion. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we want to play a leadership role in space. When we think about humanity's future in space, the economic opportunity of space, and the national security needs tied to space, there is much important work to be done. So these two topic areas show, as Stan said, where this region is starting to show its leadership potential. Hasn't reached the full capacity, right, but is starting to show it. So advanced power and propulsion includes space solar, propulsion, space nuclear, space access mobility and logistics, and refueling technologies. The Outernet includes cloud, cybersecurity, data transport, ground terminals, and much more. So that's what we will be discussing today before we all break off into the working groups. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and their companies.
Good morning. Can you hear me now? Great. So I'm Ron Faith. I'm the president and CEO of RBC Signals. So RBC Signals is based here in Redmond, Washington, though we are a global company in terms of footprint. We provide space communications as a service. So you could think of us as the connection between the Outernet and the internet. And that we do that for both government customers as well as commercial customers. We're most well known for our ground station as a service, where we have over 80 antennas in over 60 locations around the world. And provide those for customers such as the SDA, AFRL, and DIU, as well as many commercial operators around the world. And not only do we do ground station as a service, but we also just recently announced our partnerships with Inmarsat and Viasat and IQ Spacecom that allows us to do LEO to GEO communications and dynamic leasing of spectrum for satellite IoT programs as well. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Jeff Thornburg. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Portal Space Systems, 30-year veteran of the aerospace industry. Wanted to thank all the folks this morning to be here on this panel. Appreciate the invitation to speak. My career has spanned being an active duty officer in the Air Force, working for the Air Force Research Lab and NASA, spent 5 years at SpaceX, worked with Paul Allen here in Seattle the last couple of years that he was with us. And I've recently led engineering and manufacturing at Project Kuiper at Amazon, and recently founding Portal Space Systems. Love Stan's presentation. Dovetails very nicely with what Portal is all about. We're very focused on both commercial and our national security customers by developing a revolutionary spacecraft that we call Supernova, that leverages a novel propulsion system that actually allows 20x mobility compared to current systems. So what does that mean? It means commercial entities can make more money faster by moving to different orbits and places they need to be faster. It means that our national security apparatus can be highly mobile and maneuverable to take on the threats of the future that are actually threatening the space domain right now. And so we've been working closely with our friends in Congress and in the national security system, DoD and Space Force, to develop Supernova right here in the greater Seattle area. And happy to be with you this morning. Look forward to talking about all things related to the ecosystem here in the Seattle area.
You already heard from me, but I'll just say I started my space career sometime in the last century. Was very excited to be in the space industry. Didn't see it moving very fast and actually left for a while to go into enterprise software and data analytics. And then when I saw this burgeoning commercial space economy growing up nationally, globally, and here in the Pacific Northwest, I left my full-time job and became a space consultant and, as you know, a space hobbyist.
Thank you. So I'd like to start the discussion by thinking about the future. So when we think about the future in space in 10 years in your topic area, can you paint us a picture of what that vision looks like?
Happy to. So if folks were paying attention last week, I think you got a good view of what 10 years from now may look like. Last week, we had a successful test for launch of Starship from SpaceX. And Starship is coming. Glenn is coming. So what that means is we're going to have much greater launch capacity coming up, which means we're going to have many more satellites and potentially larger satellites as well. And we have to plan for the future of where we today have about, thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit. We're about to go to 10,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. We're going to, in 10 years time, we're going to go to tens of thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit. But that means we need to have the infrastructure in place to do that, especially with respect to communications. So spectrum, as we know from the wireless world, terrestrially, lands up becoming one of the most important and valuable assets. And so we have to look forward to how we're going to manage spectrum. I want to congratulate the DIU for putting forward a program recently on spectrum monitoring and characterization. So I think that's a great place that we need to be starting and going there. The second thing that happened last week, the Chinese landed on the dark side of the moon. We cannot have blinders on with respect to there's a great powers struggle that's going to be going on going forward, and that supporting United States government and their allies in their space endeavors is critically important going forward. And we love what the SDA has been doing, and we love what we do for the SDA. But the SDA still has Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 coming, many, many more satellites to put up, and the need for those to be able to communicate effectively. So absolutely. And then the third thing that happened last week is Boeing successfully had Starliner go to the ISS. That means there is going to be more humans in space. And one of the things to be excited about over the next 10 years is the amount of commercial space stations that are currently funded and are going to go up. And I can tell you from the RFPs we've seen and things like that, the communications needs of those commercial space stations far exceed what is currently provided by the ISS. And so having persistent communications from LEO to GEO and back down, being able to bring a lot of data down from those commercial space stations, having them be able to communicate between each other, will all end up being important going forward.
Yeah, my favorite topic is the future, probably because since I was about 10, I was probably living since then. So I think the thing for me is I spent a beginning part of my career in the launch industry, from Air Force, NASA through SpaceX, and revolutionizing commercial launch and bringing all this commercial launch and capacity through SpaceX and Falcon 9 back to the United States. And I wanted to spend the second act of my career on what do we do with that capability? And I think that's the exciting thing about all of the players in the new space domain. But specifically, now that you can get there affordably and routinely, what are we going to do? And I think for what we're doing at Portal and some other folks like us, it comes down to the fact that we have spent decades building spacecraft assets that are static. Meaning that we put them up there in an orbit and they have just enough maneuverability to stay in one location, which basically tells our adversaries exactly where they are and where they will be forever. And we've built a whole infrastructure around that. And now we finally have a capability in the future, as we live in the future, to have assets like Supernova and other spacecraft like it be highly maneuverable and highly mobile, so that commercial companies and the military doesn't have to make these painful decisions where if we move to do something important, we no longer have the use of that asset anymore. So the future is about reusability, longevity of assets, refuelability, long lifetimes in interesting orbits, moving across orbits at will, because it does two things. It expands the economic viability from low Earth orbit to cislunar, and it puts our adversaries on notice that we have capabilities that they don't have. And the US is going to put itself back in a position where we have more capability than our adversaries, which, as you read in the news, may not be the case right now. And I think that's really the big focus of the future. But with mobility, that unlocks a whole bunch of things, because when I worked with Paul Allen, the thing that Paul impressed upon me and the time I work with him is space tech for humanity's benefit. And I think that's a key thing for me personally that I'd also like to bring to the Pacific Northwest ecosystem is ultimately, how are we benefiting humanity from these innovations of the future? And we see all the things that Stan had in his presentation on what that unlocks now, but there's things we can't even contemplate benefits in the future. But I can tell you, we won't be able to explore the moon if we don't have an ability to support humans in that adventure. And we can't support logistically if we don't have maneuverability and mobility. The wagon train didn't survive across to the Western US here without some serious logistics, and then a railroad, and then a federal highway transportation system. So technologies like Supernova and what Portal and others are bringing here in the Pacific Northwest unlocks those railroads and highway systems of the future in ways that are very sustainable, which is very important to all of us, but obviously revolutionary within the next decade. So I think that's what the future looks like. I know that's what we're trying to bring to life, and supporting both the commercial economic viability of space along with the national security position we want to have. Yep.
This may be a slightly boring thing to talk about for 10 years from now, but standards. Right now, the space industry, everything's bespoke, exquisite. The terrestrial communications network doesn't work with the space communications network, and space vehicles from one division or company don't talk to another. And in space, if you want to do satellite servicing or refueling, there's not much in terms of a common mechanism for docking and rendezvous and approach and that kind of thing. That is all getting worked on, by the way, and this conference is a key part of that. So you'll see more integrated communications networks. You'll see standards. The Space Force is putting out standards for optical communications between satellites, and satellites, military satellites use Link 16 standards, et cetera, to communicate with ground networks. And then on the in-space mobility and refueling and satellite servicing, standards are also being developed there. So as any industry matures, just like the software industry from, say, the 1990s to now, or the internet, you take these standards for granted when you plug in your power brick or you download an app for your iPhone, but that's where space is heading, and that's going to make it a much bigger, better, more powerful, and beneficial industry in 10 years.
Great. So I'd like to shift gears and just talk about how has this region been supportive for your companies, and what challenges do you have being here in helping you build this vision that you've talked about?
So for RBC Signals, the region's been very formative for us. So first of all, you can't have a good company without good talent. And we have the ability to draw from great talent here. One of the things that's been very helpful for us is by having places like the University of Washington here, we land up having wonderful interns every year, and that those interns land up either working for us or working for Kuiper or working for others in the area. And so having that be a nice, robust pipeline of talent, young talent coming in is very, very helpful. And then also, we're in Redmond, and so Redmond's doing a lot of things to make it attractive from as a space hub area, even though we love the folks in the Kent Valley as well, and things. But the final area that I would talk about is that Seattle has couple things. One, a very international perspective. And if you're going to be a space company, not only do you need to be able to work for U.S. government and needing to do that, but you also need to be able to work around the world because kind of space is without borders. And so the international perspective that Seattle provides, especially in the Asia region and things like that, lands up being very important. The final thing I'll mention is, Seattle is Cloud City. Most of the utilization of the satellites is generating data, and that data needs to come down, and having partnerships with AWS and Microsoft Azure and that expertise lands up being critically important because satellites don't just exist on their own. They need to be part of an ecosystem. A lot of the value comes from the data products that come from the satellites, whether it's satellite IoT or Earth observation or comms or you name it. And having a lot of cloud expertise in the region brings that to bear.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love this region, right? You probably wouldn't be here if you weren't. I know my wife is the strong motivating factor in how we landed here, along with Paul Allen bringing us out here a few years ago. But I can echo some of the previous comments. I wanted to build a company here because of the talent and the expertise that exists here. It's someplace that people want to be. I agree with the international flavor this region brings, the rich aerospace history and heritage, and the kind of transition from, aircraft-centric aerospace into more of the space domain aerospace, and a healthy mix of both for this area's future, which lends itself to supply chain maturity that doesn't exist in other parts of the country. So, and working with University of Washington, and I'm part of the Creative Destruction Lab group at the University of Washington as well as Toronto, and supporting this ecosystem of startups and more mature companies and manufacturing capability for aerospace is all really critical to how it's supportive right now. Diversity as well in this whole economic area supports growing businesses and has supported Portal Space System very well in the first 3 years of our business. I think what we still need some help on, like any other region in the U.S., is when we talk about national security, how do we bring these technologies that we desperately need faster? And so our acquisition process within government programs is extremely challenging. And I'm being nice when I say that. And so one of the hardest things that small businesses like mine do every day is find ways to navigate this technology valley of death, and how we get the critical things that we need to make the future we just talked about actually happen. And we don't have the support systems in place at the federal, state level to do that as well as we could. And what I mean is, the answer can't always be go do an SBIR to get a government customer relationship going. That is not the answer. Everybody's doing it. Our company does it as well. But this path is not viable for the future needs of the United States in terms of the defense acquisition process. So we are always at the forefront of not complaining about that, but offering to be a guinea pig, to be helpful, to try to find new ways, to find new avenues of resources, so that we can move the ball forward. So I think that's a big thing in the procurement and the acquisition strategy of how we do these things quickly, and being more innovative in how we do that. There's a lot of things there that people are trying to put in play to make work. But I think the number one thing we could do as a nation, and even the Pacific Northwest, is let's figure out better ways to accelerate key technologies. Because, while we're supporting both our commercial customers and our national security customers, as a veteran of the armed forces, the things that keep me up at night are the fact that our adversaries do not put the same handcuffs on their technical industries in terms of their progress. So, not to be gloom and doom, but I will be for 2 seconds here and say it's time to wake up to the fact that we need to do business a different way to bring technology like Supernova and what Portal's doing, like what Stoke is doing in launch vehicles like Blue Origin and SpaceX and others. We need to be fully supportive of that complete small to medium to large size business ecosystem to move faster. because the people that want to deny our freedom of movement in space are not slowing down. So if I could wave a magic wand, that would be the number one thing. If I had to prioritize my life on any given day, that would be number one on my list every single day. Because I can tell you from personal experience with my company, I could move much faster than I can. I have 30 years of experience, a network of people ready to go. And what slows me down supporting my national security customer? Their ability to figure out how to work with me. So we have to fix that problem going forward.
So I think we're about 5 minutes behind schedule. So I wanted to make sure and give our local government representatives a chance to ask questions before you all go off on your space company tours, and also open up to the audience for questions. Yeah.
I was sort of curious, do you guys have a sense of, so the dollar figures, but from how much of that is going back in terms of like tax revenue to the state? What's that figure like? How's that?
I don't know. So the question was how much of the revenue for space companies going back into tax dollars? I have no idea. I don't know how that works. All I know is I can tell you that the companies are generating revenue, whether that revenue is actually domiciled. I'm making this term up because it's out of my expertise in Washington State or somewhere else. I don't know. Right? You do? Wait, hold on. Microphone.
I don't have current dollar figures, but AWB did a economic impact study around manufacturing with high peak strategies. And so I think the dollar figures on that go up to 2019, 2020. It was for all manufacturing, and space was integrated into the aerospace figures. And I don't remember the actual figures because that was a number of years ago, but those figures are there and available and can be updated. And the sourcing for those figures is there if anyone needs that information.
Thank you. And I can also help. I mean, I don't have the answers now, but I can absolutely follow up. The King County Aerospace Alliance did a recent study as well, so we can provide you all that data.
Oh, thanks. Your glass house analogy out in space with no stones was interesting. And I understand the need to be able to defend those space assets, but I was just curious a little bit off topic. Well, first a comment. Can you please explain out acronyms when you say them? Because otherwise I get lost and behind. But my question is, are there any diplomatic initiatives moving forward as well as just the whole emphasis just on developing space defense? Because it sounds like another Cold War starting, which is a huge drain on resources that we need here on the planet as well. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, a couple of quick comments on that. So first of all, the total U.S. federal government space spend, including national security and NASA, is around 65 billion, less than 1/4% of our GDP. It would be like a family making 100,000 a year, spending $19 a month. So it's not that big. Secondly, there are a lot of diplomatic efforts underway. So NASA, of course, is a partner on the International Space Station, has 14, 15, 20, I don't know, member partners working on that, including Russia. Russia right now launches American astronauts. We launched their cosmonauts as well, so that's still ongoing. This is about the only thing that survived in this environment, and space often is that way. And then NASA has been working on the Artemis Accords, and we've signed up I don't know how many nations to sort of the rules of the road for how we'll collaborate in space. Now, China and Russia are not a part of that. North Korea and Iran are not a part of that. But setting aside that, most of the countries in the world are going along with this. You know, what are the norms for operating in space? How are we going to protect the environment, not introduce weapons? So there are a lot of efforts going on in that area. And do you want to add anything?
I had one more. Like, there's also the Astra Carta effort in England and Canada that's been spearheaded, kind of like the Magna Carta for peaceful purposes in space, is another diplomatic initiative. by my friend Chris Hadfield, working with the King in London. But to your other point is like you said a comment about, it feels like another Cold War starting. It's here. So I think that's the thing that when you spoke, that's the thing I wanted to comment on is it's not when it's happening now. So the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 is woefully inadequate to deal with today's situation. So I think there really has to be a different viewpoint on what's happening on orbit. I think the challenge is I've thought about this a lot, and I don't know if you've seen the Netflix movie Leave the World Behind. If you have not, you should go watch it. It kind of catalogs a very real type of scenario of the future where I think because these in space, the average citizen doesn't see them, doesn't touch them, doesn't feel them, because we've done a poor job educating the public on what space is all about, why it's good for them, why should they care. Everything now that we do to live our daily lives passes through a space-based asset every day. And life as we know it will be dramatically impacted in ways that people don't understand until we kind of get real with this threat that's happening. So I agree with, we need to get diplomatic, but if you check in the news, the Russian flotilla is headed to Cuba right now. So the world is changing in very rapid ways presently that I think we should all be concerned about.
Yeah, I think the other thing here is if you take a hard look at what the Space Force has been working on and spending their money on, the vast majority of it is defensive capability and it's not offensive capability. So, one of the challenges we have, a la the glass houses that we have flying out in GEO that are now susceptible to anti-satellite capabilities by Russia and China, geostationary orbit. So what we're doing today is making many kind of replatforming in a lot of ways to many small satellites in low Earth orbit or mid Earth orbit. And in some cases, we're sending them out to geostationary orbit as well. But that so that our adversaries can't blind us, but they can degrade our capabilities. Okay. And so that's a much better position for us to be in with constellations of satellites. And that a lot of what those satellites are there to do is that we have a new threat. Hypersonic missile systems are real by the Chinese and the Russians, and the ability to do missile warning and tracking of those things from low Earth orbit with these new classes of satellites is critically important to the defense of the nation.
One other quick thing, if I may, because I can't help myself, I apologize, on this topic is I would like to see us move back into a mode of being able to deter our adversaries. Right now, we don't have the capability to deter the way we did in the 60s with our nuclear defense posture, right? Mutually assured destruction was a great strategy because nobody wanted to die, right? If you don't fire yours, we won't fire ours. I don't think the world adversaries to the US sees the space domain in a similar way right now because they don't see us effectively deterring the things that they want to do on orbit. And so again, for all of these reasons just mentioned, that's why we have to have a big change in how we budget, plan, and execute space acquisition, or we are going to find ourselves behind where we really want to be in the next 10 years.
Any other questions? I know.
Acknowledging that it isn't your job to create the solution, what improvements would you suggest for communicating with the federal government besides the SBIR program?
Yeah, I think the question was, it's not my problem to fix, but what would we do to improve the acquisition process, essentially? That's I'm thinking on the fly here, but I think there's a few things that I'd probably do. It's like, for the Space Force particularly, they're trying to make roads like having a quote unquote front door to bring in capabilities and understand what's out there. So I think if we start with saying what's being done better now than it used to be, I think DoD and the Space Force is doing a better job at finding what capabilities exist out there, where are they at, what could they offer. I think what is happening though, an immediate improvement, if you only gave me one wish, is our warfighters have needs and requirements right now in DoD that aren't being fulfilled, and they're not budgeted for, and they're not being supported. And so I think we've got to bring the budgeting to Space Force and DoD in general to actually fulfill those warfighter requirements for the space domain and really all the services, because I think the thing people don't understand is every single military branch leverages space assets. It's not just the Air Force's problem. It's not just the Space Force's problem. This is a national security Department of Defense problem. And they don't have the budgets required to address the problem adequately right now. So we have to figure out, one, what are we going to budget for? And I think the best way to do that is bring those combatant commander requirements and across all the armed services that leverage space and say, what do we need to get to the position we want to be at, and fund and execute it? Because I think a lot of my friends that are still in the military, they understand what they need. They understand who's working on certain things, but they don't have a nimble acquisition process and a budget that supports that. So I think the first steps would be figuring out that, and then I think we could get creative with acquisition and how money gets allocated and executed once it's there. But I think we have this big divide because Space Force has been created to lead this, but they're woefully underfunded to actually execute on it. Yeah.
And I know that there's probably no one here representing the federal government, and everyone has this challenge, but these continuing resolutions on the federal budget are insane. Like, there has to be a budget passed on time. In a business, if you don't get your budget out on time, you get fired. Like, why are these people in Congress not getting out the budget on time? And why can't we do multi-year budgeting? Like, why can't we do 2 or 3 or 4 year budgeting? These are long-term things. You can't fund them year to year, go up and down every time the political party changes or there's a political fight. Somehow we have to solve that problem. And it's not just defense, it's NASA, it's social programs, it's everything.
So we do have a question online. Brad, you can talk if you would like to.
Sure. My name is Brad Reed. I'm the former Critical Technologies and Industrial Base Manager for Space Systems Command, Los Angeles Air Force Base. I think that the Space Force has telegraphed what they're looking for, but industry hasn't responded to it. One of the issues that's been talked about here is how to get more government money into the space industrial base. But I think they look at it in a different way. In the last 60 years, both NASA and the U.S. Air Force has invested in space and has funded the space enterprise. And now they're looking for industry to fund their own space enterprise and move back out of the industrial base, move back out of the development work. For example, the industrial base functions at Los Angeles Air Force Base have essentially been discontinued so that Rad-Hard Electronics are not funded in the same way that they were before, because the expectation is industry is going to fund those types of development efforts. Also, you talk about funding mechanisms to be able to enable the new enterprises. I think the government is expecting that new financial tools are going to be developed by industry to work within the context of the FAR to be able to fund these types of things. So on those two issues, do the panelists think that new funding tools or financial instruments will be developed to move your enterprises into profitability? And then the second question is, in terms of developing the industrial base, do you think that industry is going to step up and fill the void where no longer is the industrial base being supported by the acquisition branch? Over.
Yeah, copy that. I appreciate your comments. I guess what I think there is, when we say industry, I think we have to parse it a little more carefully. I think the primes have struggled to respond to the government's needs specifically. That's Jeff Thornburg's opinion. And so that's a different question. So why haven't the primes responded? The contract structures through Cost Plus have not incentivized the behavior that's been desired. That's been a long-term problem. So I think if you say the primes have not been responsive, there's lots of reasons why, and part of it is the way the contracts are done historically. And so when we talk about new funding mechanisms, I think sometimes people interpret that as, well, shouldn't private venture capital and new space companies just go figure this out? I don't think that's the way to fill the national security need personally, because at some point the government and the warfighter knows what its needs are. if it's sitting there waiting for commercial industry to do it for them, I don't think that's the fastest path to give the warfighter what they need. So I think DoD needs to maintain more of a leadership position in both their funding levels and what they want from a requirement standpoint. Because as a lifelong engineer, I can tell you one thing that's 100% true. Shifting requirements on government programs lead to massive cost overruns and schedules being blown out of the water. And it's kind of become a joke in aerospace that, you know, pick cost, schedule, or technical, but you won't ever get all three because, you know, there's never been any program that could perform all three. Well, I've been a part of things in the new space industry that counters that old trope. But I think you have to separate, to the caller's question, legacy prime contractors over the last 50 years of the defense industrial complex versus new companies and new technologies that we're trying to bring forward in the Pacific Northwest. Let's not treat everybody the same because primes are incentivized differently than small startups are. They have different needs than primes do. They're not as entrenched in the military industrial complex as the primes are. And they're not incentivized to bring new technology fast if they have things they want to sell to the government right now. So I think the question's more complicated than what was posed on the phone, honestly, but I think we have to divide those two separate things. I worry personally that the Defense Department is getting a little too interested in how venture capital is going to save the day, because I don't think that's the answer. I think venture capital and venture capital companies are a great partner and a great tool to help, but they can't be the answer to a lack of federal spending on R&D for space technology. I personally don't think that's the right answer.
Yeah, just to echo a few things there. So first of all, thank you to the caller for Space Systems Command. You guys do wonderful work and we love working with you. The challenge here is, as was said earlier, that a lot of the innovation is coming from smaller companies, right? That are startups, venture-backed, what have you. And that, and so the contract vehicles need to reflect that. We've had some wonderful things done with OTAs. SIBRs, you know, the DIU uses an OTA class vehicle for that. And that's other transaction authority for others in the room. And so it's in some ways a way around the FAR. Quite frankly, the FAR is so onerous, federal acquisition regulations, the FAR is so onerous that only primes can really navigate and fulfill on that, which means that the innovative companies here need to work through primes and be sub to primes if it's going to be a FAR-based contract. And quite frankly, the primes aren't all motivated to bring new and innovative capabilities if it threatens an existing program or things of that nature along. So there just needs to be a recognition of, you know, if you want innovation, you know, you need to figure out how to get the innovative companies on contract vehicles that will make that possible, and that working through FARs and the primes aren't necessarily the best vehicle for getting that quickly. Hopefully that.
I agree with everything these guys says, and they're in it, so I don't want to dilute it. But I just want to say something slightly positive, which is when you talk to people from other countries, they're actually envious of the way the U.S. government works with our commercial ecosystem here. So everything they said is true, and we need to absolutely get better. But I do want to recognize that Space Force, DIU, AFRL, DARPA, and DoD are really trying, and they have incentives and challenges. They have incentives from the executive branch, the legislative branch, regulations. There's all kinds of challenges. We have challenges on this side as well. People are definitely trying, and I applaud the dialogue and everyone's efforts on both the government side and the private sector side.
Okay, I think we are ready to move to our next session. I'd like to give our panelists a warm round of applause. I will turn the mic back over to Mike.